Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of Mind Matters with KJ, talking about bipolar disorder. Not only am I going to be going over the criteria for bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder and defining the differences between the two, we're going to be talking about why it's important to get an accurate diagnosis. I am not a clinician. I am not somebody who can diagnose or provide treatment. I'm simply somebody who has my own experience to share. I have learned a lot over the years that has helped me, and I know that if this information was more readily available, it could help other people too. The reason that it is so important to understand what bipolar disorder actually is because the treatment for bipolar is different than the treatment for unipolar depression. Unipolar depression is usually treated through an antidepressant, an SSRI. An SSRI alone in manic depression illness or bipolar disorder can actually make the disorder worse. I'm going to read the criteria for both type 1 and type 2 bipolar disorder and cyclothymia, which isn't quite bipolar disorder but can turn into it later. A lot of this will start sounding repetitive, but I am going to speed read through it and you'll hear some of the repetitions, which will get in your mind what very specific criteria is for a diagnosis. Bipolar 1 disorder. For a diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder, it is necessary to meet the following criteria for a manic episode. Bipolar 2 disorder, you never actually have a manic episode. You have a hypomanic episode, which we'll get into in a minute. Basically, it's not quite reaching mania. It's a little bit less. The manic episode may have been preceded by and may be followed by hypomanic episodes or major depressive episodes. So say you even only have one manic episode and the rest are hypomanic, you still would have a bipolar 1 diagnosis. So a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated expansive or irritable mood and abnormally and persistently increased activity or energy lasting at least 1 week and present most of the day, nearly every day, or any duration if hospitalization is necessary. The amount of time is very important to listen to. This has to last at least 1 week to be considered a real manic episode. Another thing that people often associate with bipolar disorder is just mood, when so much of it has to do with energy states, high revved up energy in the manic episodes. B, during the period of mood disturbance and increased energy or activity, 3 or more of the following symptoms. 4, if the mood is only irritable. Do you see that caveat in there? There's so many little things that make it hard for a person to diagnose themselves. Are present to a significant degree and represent a noticeable change from usual behavior. 1, inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. 2, decreased need for sleep, as in feels rested after only 3 hours of sleep. 3, more talkative than usual or pressure to keep speaking. 4, flight of ideas or subjective experience that thoughts are racing. 5, distractibility, as in attention is too easily drawn to unimportant or irrelevant external stimuli as reported or observed. 6, increase in goal-directed activity, either socially, at work or school, or sexually, or psychomotor agitation, like purposeless, non-goal directed activity. Just feeling the need to go, do. 7, excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences, like engaging in unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretions, or foolish business investments. Point C, the mood disturbance is sufficiently severe to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning, or to necessitate hospitalization to prevent harm to self or others, or there are psychotic features, which we won't be getting into all of those details in this episode. Point D, the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance like drug abuse, a medication, or other treatment, or another medical condition. So there are more things to read here, but I'm just going through the bare bones of it all. And even that's a lot. So now we go on to what a hypomanic episode is. Point A, a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally and persistently increased activity or energy lasting at least 4 consecutive days and present most of the day, nearly every day. The main difference here is for a manic episode, it has to reach 7 days consecutively. And for a hypomanic episode, it has to reach only 4 days consecutively. Point B, during the period of mood disturbance and increased energy and activity, 3 or more, just like before, of the following symptoms, or 4 or more if it is only irritable, like before, have persisted, represent a noticeable change from usual behavior, and have been present to a significant degree. So here they are again, and I'm going to read through them really fast because you've heard them once before. 1, inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. 2, decreased need for sleep. 3, more talkative than usual or pressure to keep talking. 4, flight of ideas. 5, distractibility. 6, increase in goal-directed activity. 7, excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. Point C, the episode is associated with an unequivocal change in functioning that is uncharacteristic of the individual when non-symptomatic. D, the disturbance in mood and the change in functioning are observable by others. E, the episode is not severe enough to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning or to necessitate hospitalization. If there are psychotic features, the episode is, by definition, manic. So I said we weren't going to get into psychotic features because I'd have to go somewhere else in this book, and that goes off on a little bit of a tangent. Some examples would be hallucinations or delusions. A lot of people ask, so is bipolar 1 just more severe than bipolar 2? And what I have heard said is yes and no. So the manic episodes can get more out of control, but people with bipolar 2 disorder have more depression typically than people with bipolar 1. It will often take years for somebody to get an accurate diagnosis if their hypomania isn't super visible. But the treatment can make all the difference in that person's quality of life. So now that we know what the criteria is for a manic or a hypomanic episode, let's get into the criteria for a major depressive episode. A, 5 or more of the following symptoms have been present during the same 2-week period and represent a change from previous functioning. At least one of the symptoms is either a depressed mood or a loss of interest or pleasure. Do not include symptoms that are clearly attributable to another medical condition. I don't know if I've already said this, but I'll say it again. There can be so much overlap in different disorders that if you try to diagnose yourself by yourself without someone else's help, you know your body better than anybody else does. But somebody who has been trained to know the bigger scope can help give a more clear diagnosis. And I'm going to get into some comorbidities in a different episode. A comorbidity is basically just a double diagnosis or a triple diagnosis, having several diagnoses. There can be overlap in symptoms with ADHD or borderline personality disorder or PMDD. Here are the 9 symptoms. 1, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report, as in feel sad, empty, or hopeless, or observation made by others, as in appears tearful. Note, in children and adolescents, the mood can be irritable. That's where it gets tricky. Children manifest differently than adults. Number 2, markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective account or observation. 3, significant weight loss when not dieting or weight gain, as in a change of more than 5% of body weight in a month, or decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day. In children, consider failure to make expected weight gain. Number 4, insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. 5. Psychomotor agitation or retardation nearly every day, observable by others, not merely subjective feelings of restlessness or being slowed down. 6. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. 7. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, which may be delusional, nearly every day, not merely self-reproach or guilt about being sick. 8. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day, either by subjective account or as observed by others. 9. Recurrent thoughts of death, not just fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Those are the 9 symptoms you need to have at least 5 for to have a clinical depression diagnosis. When accompanied by a mania or a hypomania diagnosis, ta-da, it's bipolar. Now, if a lot of this resonates for you or somebody that you know, but you don't meet all of the criteria, there is something on that bipolar spectrum that is called cyclothymia, which is also here in the DSM-5. And here is what it has to say about that. A, for at least 2 years, at least 1 year in children and adolescents, there have been numerous periods with hypomanic symptoms that do not meet criteria for a hypomanic episode, and numerous periods with depressive symptoms that do not meet criteria for a major depressive episode. B, during the above 2-year period, 1 year in children and adolescents, the hypomanic and depressive episodes have been present for at least half the time, and the individual has not been without the symptoms for more than 2 months at a time. C, criteria for a major depressive, manic, or hypomanic episode have never been met, because again, if it was met, you would have that diagnosis, not this diagnosis. D, the symptoms in criterion A are not better explained by schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or other specified or unspecified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. E, the symptoms are not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance, such as drug abuse, a medication, or another medical condition like hyperthyroidism. And F, the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Because of my own experience with this, I feel compelled to help teach the things that I have learned so that other people do not have to suffer as long as I did. The onset of my disorder was in my teenage years, which is most typical of bipolar disorder in your teen years or early 20s. It's very uncommon to develop bipolar disorder after that, whereas it's more common to develop unipolar depression later in life. I'm going to do other episodes on the shame aspects because I didn't receive the help that I needed nearly soon enough. For me, the depressions were evident and the hypomanias went undetected. I'm going to be dedicating a very specific episode to women who have PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, because that aggravated my bipolar disorder. It wasn't until after I had my son that the symptoms became unmanageable. Started trying many different medications with some success here and there, but it wasn't until I discovered lithium that my disorder became manageable and that any suicidal ideation I had completely went away. I still have to manage symptoms, but not having suicide ideation as part of the problem has been a huge game changer. I'll be repeating myself over and over that I am not a clinician. I cannot diagnose or treat, but I can give my own personal experience, and my body is different than your body, and what is right for me is not right for everybody. But lithium has saved my life, and so I will praise its name my entire life. It is still, to this day, known as the golden standard in treating bipolar. However, it has fallen to the wayside of mood stabilizers, which work great for some people, not me. In fact, too high of a dose actually backfired quite horribly on me. But that is something that I worked out with my doctor and that people should work out with theirs. Sometimes it has a bad reputation because it is an intense treatment that, if used improperly, can be lethal. However, it's a natural element and the drug companies can't make as much money off of it as other mood stabilizers. For me, nothing has worked as well as lithium. It says right here, lithium's ability to fully alleviate the symptoms. Did you hear that? To fully alleviate the symptoms of a devastating condition makes it one of the best treatments in medicine. It's called the penicillin of psychology. Doesn't mean it's a cure-all, but it definitely needs to be more known about. Another reason that it's important to have an accurate diagnosis is certain things that can look like other things, such as borderline personality disorder, which has a high variable of mood instability, is not treated with medications. Its first line of defense is therapies, especially dialectical behavioral therapy, whereas the first line of defense for bipolar disorder is medication. And therapies are great to use in conjunction, especially cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to be doing a separate episode on different types of therapies and go over what they do, and also what the difference is between therapy and life coaching or mental health coaching. It's very important to look at mental illness like a physical illness. I really look at my disorder as if I had diabetes or something that needed constant treatment like that. And I'm grateful for the resources that I have, such as the medications and the therapies. This book has also been a really great resource for me. It's called The Bipolar Disorder Survival Guide by David Mccloud, PhD. He talks a lot about recognizing prodromal symptoms, which are noticing when you're starting to escalate up into mania or spiral down into depression. When you can understand what your triggers are, then you can stop a full episode from occurring, which is pretty amazing. I highly recommend the book. The more open dialogue we have, the more education, the less suffering there will be around this disease. The hopeful news is, even though I, like everyone else, still experience my really off or my really bad days, as a whole, ever since I received treatment, I have been doing much better than I have done in a long time, and I foresee myself continuing to improve even from here. And I want to give that same hope to anyone else out there who may be suffering from this same disorder. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm excited to see you on episode 3.